Hey, what is up, everybody? This is the Four Pillar Podcast, recorded here at Lashley Training Center. And this is Ian Lashley. I have Matt Gottemeyer. We have a special guest today, Zach Rayburn. He is the evangelist or preacher, kind of, I guess whatever title you want to use. I think it kind of roughly is the same thing. But he preaches or evangelizes at the Millwood Church of Christ. And that's currently where my wife and I go for church every Sunday, and he does an awesome job. And I don't want to mess your credentials up, because I know you studied a lot and have a lot of credentials. So I'll let you introduce yourself really quick and kind of give just a quick your background and all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I have a little bit of training, psychology, 4-year program, ancient literature, which is more of the historical aspect of biblical doctrines rather than theology itself, and my main focus probably in education is apologetics, which is proofs of the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does a super awesome job with the sermons and public speaking at the church and stuff. So I thought that's why we would have him in. He's one of the smartest guys I've met when it comes to all studying the Bible and stuff. So that's what we're going to get into today. Is our kind of the title today is what is faith? Because obviously our podcast stands for the 4 pillars. It stands for faith, family, fitness, and finance. And we want to talk about the faith aspect today. And so really quick, I'm just going to go around, and I'm going to let Matt go first. What does faith mean to you?
Like we were talking before the show, I think you can look at it having faith in this life, and then there's also faith in the afterlife. And to me, there's, faith is a belief in something that you can't see or touch, right? Which I have. I also feel like there's a responsibility that comes with that, living faithfully, which means, living the life that we're called to live, and continuing to do that day in and day out, even when things aren't going our way, right? Because I think there's this idea that if we're faithful, if we pray, then we should get everything we want, right? And I think sometimes people, when they don't, they kind of lose it. So to me, it's about how you live, not only just what you believe.
Right. Yeah, no, I thought that's really good. I mean, that's basically kind of a summary of what I, roughly would say faith is. And obviously, I think just when you think about faith too, I think of just religion or God just in general, and having, faith or faith to God as well, and having that being a part of my life as well. And I was going to ask Zach, so coming from a preacher, what does faith actually mean?
Well, there's a lot of different definitions of faith, and that way it's extremely personal. Like if I talk about my faith, you talk about your faith. In one sense, we're talking about the same thing, but we're also talking about two radically different things and can be meaning different things. And one thing that, Matt, you had talked about is this duality there, where you have two different sides of it. And C.S. Lewis and many theologians historically have come up with that conclusion. C.S. Lewis said one part of faith is belief, one part of it's virtue. I think that's about right. And when you look at the Greek word, it's translated several different ways. So that Greek word faith can also mean trust and fidelity and loyalty and confidence. And so when you have a word that has so many definitions, no wonder why it's so hard to pin down and say what it actually is. But I think it's one thing. I think faith in general is one thing that bleeds into two different areas. One of those areas is the inward side, and that's the mind and the heart, and then the other area is the outward side. And that would be the relationship we live with reality or with the world, and things like trials and temptations and maybe even martyrdom. If it would be the case. And because I think it's one thing that bleeds into two different realities, that inward and outward side, I think the best definition of faith I can give is an evidence-based conviction. And I think that kind of covers all the basis. If I say have faith, I'm saying trust in God because of the evidence, one, that He's real, and two, because He's worked in your life. And And I like to illustrate like this. This Sunday, Ian and I are actually neighbors temporarily right now.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know if it's a good thing. So I always joke about every Sunday. I feel like I think the sermon's about me or something. I've been told across the street.
I just look through the window. No, but it's So this Sunday, both of us are going to cross a bridge to get to the church building, and we've crossed that bridge several times, and we know it's held us in the past, and we have faith that's going to hold us this Sunday. We don't know for sure in an objective sense it's going to hold us up and get us where we're going towards the goal this Sunday, because this Sunday hasn't happened yet. But because it's done it time and time and time again, we have faith this Sunday it's going to get us there. And I think God's kind of like that bridge. There are things that we haven't gone through yet, and we don't necessarily know that in the objective sense that we're going to make it through or anything like that. But because of all the evidence in the past, and the ways that God has seen us through, even going far back as the time of Moses and Abraham, or you just look at the time of Jesus on the cross, those examples and pieces of evidence in the past, I think, serve as the evidence that says because God has been faithful in the past, He's going to be faithful to me in the present when I don't know, and the future that I haven't gone through yet. So in that way, He's like the bridge that holds us up and keeps us going towards the prize.
Yeah, I think that's majestic sounding. But no, I mean, really. But I guess the question and the first thing I think about too is I think a lot of people probably think this, or you have people probably ask you this. So if I had something happen in my life, why didn't God make that happen for me? Did I not have enough faith to make this happen, or something like that? I know you probably hear that all the time, or I've thought about that. I've heard stories from other people and be like, oh well, it's because maybe I didn't have enough faith, or if I had faith, or God was faithful, or whatever, then He should have made X happen, or something like that.
Yeah, so that's another difficult question.
Right.
So that's a whole field of theology called theodicy, and they've been studying it for thousands and thousands of years. And Thomas Aquinas writes on, and so many other people. And it's just, if God is good and He's all powerful and He can theoretically stop anything, why doesn't He? And why do we live in an evil world? And that is something that we do have to wrestle with. But one thing that's important is if you accept that God exists, which we all believe that He does.
Yeah.
But if you're going to blame God for something, inherently you're accepting that He exists. You also have to accept the whole biblical narrative that follows along with God, and that is that this death and pain and suffering isn't God's intention. So the first thing is God wanted a perfect world, and we were the ones that messed it up, according to the biblical narrative. And also, why does God allow these bad things to happen? Well, it assumes that maybe these bad things don't have good outcomes that we just don't know yet. I can't tell you the amount of times where people go through trials, and then I'll talk to them afterwards, and without going through that trial, they went. I'll give you an example of my own life. Just a month before I started talking to the woman that's now my wife,
Right.
I was cheated on by a lady who was going to church, but apparently she had some baggage she hadn't quite dealt with. She got drunk, cheated on me, and got pregnant. And that's the way I found out that she wasn't being faithful to me. Now, I could ask God, why did you let me get with her? But if I wasn't able to get with her or the other failures in my relationships, I wouldn't have known my own value, and I also wouldn't have known how to appreciate and really take care of my wife that I now have, that I don't have to worry about those things with.
Right.
Well, would you have even met her?
No,
Yeah.
I knew her. She went to church, but I wouldn't have been open to speaking about her. And I didn't know this, but she liked me the whole time, and she's waiting on me. And the reason why, she wasn't trying to nudge it so that I could start nudging back is because I had a girlfriend.
Yeah. Right.
So by this loss, I actually gained something that's far more valuable. And life is like that. And not everything works that way. I can't say the loss of a child results in anything good necessarily on this world. And that's where we also have to have faith in the future, that child, because God is good, is out of whatever pain and suffering they might have had to go through. Not that that's a great explanation. It's a logical one, but that doesn't satisfy the emotional response there. But we just have to trust that God's good and understand that there's all kinds of reasons why things happen. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're not. And we've done bad in other people's life. I've hurt people and caused some trauma. I'm sure I guarantee it. Why didn't God stop me? Well, because he loves me, and if he would have stopped me then, he wouldn't be able to have the eternal relationship he has with me now. So he's patient, long-suffering for all of us to repent, even the worst of us.
Right.
So it ultimately comes down to, God is a just God. He's a holy God. He's a patient God. And there's no one answer, I think.
No, I think that's I think that's a pretty good answer as well to it, as far. So Matt, talk about, you talked about faith versus like being faithful, which I kind of wanted to ask Zach too as part of this, is like, do you think, like, obviously just like faith take action then, or is there any action inside of faith? And I mean, obviously, and say you can go what you brought up, because I thought that was a good point.
I think one, that there's kind of this idea that God, and I can't stand this, but that God is kind of like a wishing well, right? You just, you pray for more money, you pray for better health, whatever the situation may be, and that's all you really do, right? It's the same as asking, in any relationship with God, your wife, people always ask, well, what do they do for me? When I think the question is, what can I do for you, or what do I do for you, right? So when I think of being faithful, I think of what I'm supposed to do and who I'm supposed to be in the life I'm supposed to live. And I know things are going to happen. I know I'm not going to get everything I want. To me, that's what faith is. I see what I'm being called to do, and you live that no matter what happens in your life, right? I don't know. Yeah. Do you agree with that? Or
no, I absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. You have to be faithful, So Hebrews 11 is kind of one of those passages that you really only know and hear about if you're a Christian, but yeah, we call it the Faith Hall of Fame, as cringy or uncringy as it might be. And, the Faith Hall of Fame, and, by faith, Noah built the ark. By faith, Abraham trusted in God. By faith, Moses led the Israelites. Like, all these, and there's over 20 examples of things that people have done by faith there. They didn't just sit back and believe that to happen. They worked at it. Noah didn't sit there and believe the ark would put itself together. He spent years of his life gathering the lumber and the supplies and the help, putting this thing together piece by piece, nail by nail. And that's why I called faith an evidence-based conviction, because if you really believe something, which is what faith is, you're going to have a conviction. You're
going to take the action, right, to do something.
If you believe a parachute will save you and you jump out of an airplane, you happen to have a parachute on, you're going to pull the cord. You're going to be convicted to take action, and you're not going to say, well, I'll just believe it'll save me. Well, that belief won't do anything if you don't act on it.
Right.
And I think Christian faith is the same thing.
So what can, what do you think faith can accomplish in one person's life? That could be, I guess, kind of a bigger, broad question as well too.
It's also so deep too.
Right.
I mean, maybe the better question is, what can't faith?
Right. What can it accomplish?
Yeah, it might not accomplish everything you think you set out. Like through faith, I'll get a red Corvette with a convertible.
Right.
But it'll reprioritize what you want to accomplish. And I mean, you think of some of the great things that have happened historically because of Christians. I mean, modern medicine, that you look at a lot of old hospitals, and a lot of them are faith-based.
Right.
And, there's all kinds of things out there that Christianity is really just projected. And it's interesting, historians like Tom Holland, not Spider-Man Tom Holland, but historian Tom Holland, he was an atheist, and he looks out and he's trying to basically show that Christianity is actually just a bunch of pagan religions thrown together with someone named Jesus kind of smacked on top of it. And but as he started studying history, he realized that there's a dramatic transformation in humans before Jesus and after Jesus. And you look, for thousands of years before that, they're writing on paper, and they're doing some things like the slope of the earth was basically calculated within 40 years of the time of Jesus. Like there was a lot of things that were accomplished but you also look at some of the things that are going on in just the world are so barbaric. And Tom Holland, the historian, notes this radical change that takes place after the time of Christianity. And that happened by people of faith. And I mean, maybe the most important one isn't even the physical, but it's what's happened in all of our lives. A sinner such as I gets to know God, which is incredible, an infinite, spaceless, timeless, metaphysical being. We get to know who that is in a personal way and have a relationship with him forever.
Right.
I mean, what a more powerful testimony is there? So, what can't faith accomplish?
Right. Well, and then before I get into about losing faith and why people do that and stuff like that, Matt, can you share the one story about your job, about the lady that you know I'm talking about?
So before I worked here, I worked somewhere else, and well, actually, I worked out somewhere else. Anyways, they offered me a job, but they had also told somebody else who was in college at the time that they could have a job. So they called this person, and she said she had a couple offers, right? And she goes, I don't know. I'm waiting for God to tell me what to do. Okay. So they give her like a week or two. They call her back. I don't know yet. God hasn't told me what to do. So now a month goes by. She gives the same answer, and they just said, okay, we're going to go with this other person, right? I don't know what angle you want to go with this, but I feel like people get paralyzed by that, right? There has to be some action. That's why I brought up earlier, you just sit there and have faith, right? There's more to it than that. What do you think of that kind of mindset?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to balance because there's the side where you have to be patient, be still, and know that He is God. But there's also, you've heard the old saying, pray like it all depends on God, work like it all depends on you. So there's something to be said about both of those sides because, if we're responsible for everything in our life, then how will we ever give credit to God and be thankful for that? But at the same time, if we sit back and do nothing, how are we supposed to know that the byproduct of that, rather than it being God, could just simply be our laziness? We'd recently bought a house. If I sat back and did nothing, we wouldn't have a house.
Right.
But at the same time, there were roadblocks where I couldn't do anything more. I was stretched, and I basically just had to tell the guys, I was like, listen, we've given you what we can give you, and you make it work or don't make it work, and we'll regroup and find a different house. But we've done what we could do, and we have that house now, and it's quite possible that because we ran the torches, or carried the torch as far as we could,
right.
God carried the rest of it for us. So,
and that's where I was going to kind of bring up. So, basically with faith or whatever, you can. Faith would come in to where if you can't control anything else in a situation or whatever, that's where faith would really come in because, right, if you can still, obviously Matt and I got to talking about just having free will and stuff like that, right? God gives us free will. So we kind of have to make decisions, right, based off of what He tells us in the Bible. And, He gives us kind of a moral code, basically how we should kind of conduct our lives. And, we still have to make those decisions or have actions on things. But then obviously at some point, there are some things like what you said, right, will get out of our control where I literally can't do anything. It's not my control to fix or do X, Y, Z. And that's where, right, my faith would come in to hope that this works out or that it goes the direction I want it to go potentially. But like we were talking about earlier, he could have a bigger plan and it may not work right there. It may, go on to something else. But I mean, do you think that is roughly accurate, or what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I do think you have to have faith even in the times that are good and you can explain them and thankfulness, and because even though there's 10 natural possibilities and you happen to have one of them take place in your life, doesn't mean that God didn't direct that one instead of the other 9. There's still that faith aspect there that, it's glorifying and it's the best or it's what you need, whatever that might be. But yeah, what you said about, when you can't do that anymore, that's where faith comes in. And I mean, why would we need faith if everything was explainable? What would be the purpose of faith if we could do everything ourselves?
Right.
What would be the purpose of faith if everything turned out the way we wanted it to turn out?
Yeah, faith shines its bright. I think it's always there, but faith shines its brightest during the times where we're kind of in our darkness.
Right. I like that.
And in the example that I just used, and you used the metaphor of like a roadblock, that I don't see a roadblock in front of that person, right? She can make a decision. She didn't because, I don't know, she was waiting for something that might not happen as far as, in the time that she needed it to happen, right? So she kind of has to act on her own and make a decision. I mean, because the consequence of that was losing a potential employer.
Yeah, and that's where you kind of need spiritual maturity. And, in one sense, we need faith in all areas of our life, but we don't have to sit back and wait like God's got to perform a miracle before we move on, because God's given us His Word, and that's His direction. And by knowing that and being mature in that, that's going to help make a lot of decisions in our life. Like if I sit back and wait for a sign for everything, well, the Bible even says a wicked and perverse generation seeks a sign. Not that that's always the case, I think, but there does come a time where God has already told us what He wants us to do, and we just need to know what He says about it and do it. Like when looking for a spouse, give me a sign that this person's the one. Well, do they have the fruits of the Spirit? Do they love God more than you? Are they going to lead you to Christ? Or, one of the qualifications I had when I wanted a wife is I wanted someone who, if I passed away for whatever reason, I could trust to remarry and have a godly husband again that could lead my children the path they ought to go. And if that wasn't the path she chose, someone who would lead my kids in a God-honoring way and not let them do whatever. It's sometimes you see in relationships, there's the one spouse that kind of says, yeah, you can do whatever you want. And then there's the one spouse that's real tight. I don't want that relationship. I want the type of relationship that says, if I'm gone, you guys are still going down the path I would want you to go if I were there right with you.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So why do you think people lose their faith, and why and how do you think people lose their faith?
Well, there's a lot of statistics out there, and they're really hard. I think it's multifactorial in the sense that there's a culture that prioritizes things that aren't faith-based. So, one example of this is you guys remember that school used to never have football games or basketball games on Sundays. Okay, well, now they have that. Right. So those kids aren't getting that influence. That's a cultural thing.
I just had a similar conversation 10 minutes before you walked in.
Yeah, it's a prevalent issue.
Are you talking like youth games, or just all sporting events in general?
Just not necessarily all sporting events, but people will turn off the TV to go to church usually, right. But rarely will they withdraw their kid from an athletic sport to make sure they're there.
In the city I grew up in, you weren't even allowed to play in parks on Sundays.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Kind of like a blue law type of. But so you have that culture, it used to be the parents told the kids what they were going to do. Now it's kind of the kids tell the parents what to do.
Right.
There's that cultural thing. And I think more and more as America is wealthier, I think we don't see a need for God. And we say, hey, I have all my needs met, and what do I actually get out of church? And I was talking with one of my missionary friends the other day, and it's like, how do they do church in Zimbabwe right now? Because we spent a lot of money on a building, we have to update our sound system all the time, and that gets expensive. And the budget it takes to keep a Church America going, it's just so much. It costs so much money.
Versus the church in Zimbabwe is probably $100 a month or something.
Yeah, they have a hut, and they come together and they sing and they dance and they preach and they eat meals together. It's right. There's some people can't bring anything, and other people can bring a few extra scraps that they have, and they just come together and it is such a raw, like, beautiful, genuine setup,
Right.
and it's so different than us, and it's because the culture of that area is different.
Right.
Like, in America, if, your church building is more than 40 or 50 years old and it's starting to get that old dusty smell, people are like, this isn't for me. If your music isn't the same quality that comes out of their radio on the way to church, like, this isn't me.
Right.
If the, what they're hearing is offensive, they would just say, yeah, well, this isn't for me. And that's a big shame, because in order to grow, you have to risk being offensive. And to think you have to risk being offensive, and you have to be willing to ask questions and get honest answers and feedback. And so as people don't want to be offended, unfortunately, they stunt their growth.
Right.
So there's all kinds of things.
And they're offended because they don't want to confront that's within them that's probably true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. And if it's not them personally, it's I think more and more as our cultures become postmodern, rather than just seeing good and evil, we see the world through the lenses of oppressed and oppressor. So if you say, and that oppressor can be anything you want. For some people, it's us, even though we're not doing anything.
Right.
And for other people, it's someone else. And same with the oppressed, right? Some people, like, we could sit there and talk about how we're a victim of high taxes or something like that.
Right.
And other people can talk about how they're a victim of another issue. And that's kind of how we see the world right now. And that's the culture shift of this oppressed and oppressor mentality. And if you are saying anything negative towards the oppressed, and the oppressed, everybody's oppressed in their own way, but the oppressed that they want to highlight, then you're an oppressor and you're inherently evil and misogynistic and
all the other things.
Yeah, all the other big words that they probably can't spell.
I mean, we see the same thing at the gym. I mean, I think that what you're saying too, that goes with all aspects of everybody's life as well. I mean, with religion, with fitness, with their family, with their relationship with their spouses, with just everything. So I mean, that's what we've noticed in our, like, even just running the business or whatever. Like, we're a family owned business. It's not that we like throw God in people's faces here, but I mean, people know that, like, obviously we're like, I'm faith based, like my family's faith based, and that's how we run our business, and the kind of morals and ethics and stuff that we have here. And at some point it's like, if you don't like that, then don't come here. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, the best people you have coming to your gym are the ones that are least likely to be offended in most cases, because they're the ones that have had to admit they're not perfect.
Right.
And not only that they're not perfect, but they have areas they need to work on. When you get offended at everything, you'll admit that you're not perfect to yourself, but you won't live like you're not perfect, and you won't improve on that.
Yeah.
Well, everybody
no
likes to
there.
use the "I'm not perfect" for an excuse when they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But then if you call them out on doing something about it, that's when.
Yeah. How dare you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think you're perfect? I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Cause I literally just got a grammar lesson yesterday from one of our staff members. My code of conduct thing that I typed up or whatever just made me think about that. She came in here. Do you realize that, like, the grammar on this and stuff is all messed up? And I was like, yeah, it is. And, she showed me, like, she showed me why and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I'm bad at it. Like,
time to download some Grammarly or something,
right? But I mean that. But right,
well, that's kind of the easy stuff.
And that was a very easy, simple example. But you're right, I could be like, oh, I'm not perfect, and like it was, whatever. But I'm like, yeah, you're right. I learned actually some grammar yesterday. Properly how to spell or adjust words and something. And could. I guess it kind of made myself be humble. I know something very tiny, but still made me be humble and be like, yeah, I need to learn. Like, I can learn this, or I'm not right all the time, and and just be blunt about it. Tell me what I did wrong and how to fix it. And she's like, hope I'm not offending you. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, if you didn't tell me I suck at this and this is how you do it, I'm not going to learn how to do it better or anything like that.
I think a lot of this plays in. The reason you acted that way is because you didn't make that a part of your identity.
Right.
When people get offended, it's when they make something, like if you're an English teacher or something, you'd be like, how dare you correct me?
Right.
And I had this actually at college. The guy, the teacher tried to correct me, and I was like, no, I'm right. And I not because I knew I was right, just because I used Grammarly and like 3 other softwares. Like, I guarantee I'm right. And on top of that, because it was a fairly important paper,
Right.
I had another English teacher grade it. So I had, 5 or 6 sources against this one, and I combated that, and he did not like, and it was something incredibly dumb. Maybe placement of a comma
Right.
or something,
Yeah,
and that's
stuff like that.
yeah, but he didn't like the idea, and the reason why I fought is because I had points marked off for it.
Right.
And that to him is his identity. And what's at jeopardy there? Not really, because it's like, oh, well, you made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. But in his
Right.
mind, it's, if this is who I am and I can't do that, then I have failed myself and I have failed my position in all of society.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to put your identity in things that matter rather than
Right.
your identity shouldn't be in something that goes away with you whenever you are in the grave. Your identity should be in something that surpasses that.
Right. And being Christianity.
Yeah, and that
Right.
I think faith is the top priority.
Right.
So if the meaning of significance has to do with lasting of time, then without God, everything is so insignificant. And atheists like Richard Dawkins or Pinkerton have talked about this, whether you're good or bad, or you do, you restore monarch butterflies, or you commit like complete annihilation. It's all a matter of opinion without God. And Nietzsche said, God is dead. In the 1967, I think it is, version of the Time magazine, said God is dead. And his counterpart, Totowski, said, if God is dead, then all is permissible. So without God, there's no standard. And everything you can do is insignificant. But with God, if God's true and afterlife is true, then what you do actually matters, because what you do here bleeds into that.
Right.
And that's why, like, for me, I like the way you have the order on your 4 pillars.
Right.
Because faith is the most important thing.
Right.
And then family, and then fitness and finances. And I think, fitness and finances kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And that's not to say they're not important. So we've both talked about James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, and he talks about how these small things come together and make big things happen. And my college did a study where they basically they went around to our cars in the parking lot, and they looked through the windows, and they compared the students' car cleanliness with their grades, and they actually found there's a pretty good correlation.
Okay.
Now,
Between a clean car and good grades?
I was going to say messy car and good grades, right?
Yeah, and it didn't have anything to do with the fact that, when I clean my car, my grades magically teleported up the scale.
Right.
But there's a personality thing, and you think of faith, faith isn't a separate thing you do. It's a part of who you are. Same with your family. Like, you can't just put yourself into family mode and then go out, turn family mode off and then violate all your ethics.
Right.
Once you're a dad, you're always a dad. Once you're a husband, you're always...
Yeah, that those things transcend your location or, friend group, wherever. There might be trials within that. And, all these small things, so like they kind of go hand in hand. You think of, fitness and finances. When you have bad finances, there's a sign. It's a little yellow one, saying foreclosure on your window, right? For everybody to see, they give you the free sign. When you have bad fitness, it's apparent, right? You're gobbling down whatever you're gobbling down. There's obviously physical aesthetics that are associated with bad fitness and things like that. And I get there's health reasons, and because there's always going to be that one person like, well, it's a whatever issue. I get there's medical exceptions.
Yeah.
But there's also people where that doesn't apply to. So there's these physical signs for bad finances and bad fitness. It's a little harder to find that in faith until you go to ethics, but there's not like anyone that puts a little yellow placard on your forehead or anything like that.
Right. It says I'm being a bad person or
yeah.
Yeah.
But and the way that there's signs for that, I think those are indicators of our spiritual life. They're like the atomic habits, the small habit that is compiled with all these other habits that make up our personality. And if you strive for success in your fitness and your finances, because we are called to be good stewards of both those, if you're striving for excellence in those areas, not making a religion out of it,
right?
But that will bleed over into your spiritual life. If you're bankrupt because you're prioritizing your money incorrectly, then odds are your spiritual life's going to be bankrupt. If you don't care about what you eat because you're all about convenience and what's the tastiest and not necessarily what's the healthiest, then you're going to be feeding yourself a bunch of junk spiritually. And so those things they all kind of tie together. An illustration, there's really two illustrations I like, but the old wagon wheels, you have like the central hub and all the spokes.
Right.
So all those spokes are like the different aspects of our life. And imagine for this case, they're like the pillars.
Uh-huh.
And then that hub is faith. They are all based off of that. They all support faith, and faith all supports them. There's that hand-in-hand relationship because you have to have discipline for fitness.
Right.
But fitness also creates discipline. The same way with faith. In order to have a good faith, you have to be disciplined, but good faith also produces discipline. So just
right.
They work together. So you have that hub. I think faith is the central hub. Or you think of a ring for a second. Gemologists, when they're making a diamond, you have what's called a table of the diamond. Everything's based off that. Imagine it's where the two main angles to go together. If I were a woman, I could show you.
Your diamond ring.
Yeah. I don't even think mine's real gold.
That's okay.
So
Matt just used an onion ring.
Yeah.
I like it. But you have that table, all the angles are based off that, and that table is really important because the angle reflection, it's all geometry. And the reflection of that is what creates the sparkle and the glitter and the attractive part of a diamond. Within that ring also you have the setting underneath it, and based off how open that setting is how much light comes through. And then you have the actual ring, and that gives purpose to it. And I think faith is like that. So imagine that diamond is our life.
Right.
Because of, a raw diamond isn't actually worth much. But because it has those cuts and you can see the beauty, there's some value there. The setting helps that beauty come through, and it anchors it to something that makes it tangible, purpose. And that ring is the actual purpose because no one just has a diamond walking around in their pocket.
Right.
You get that diamond in of itself, it's not worth too much. You put it on a ring, and all of a sudden you have something that when you give to a fiance or someone you want to make your fiance, it becomes the most important thing you have in your pocket, and it now carries purpose. And faith in our life, it makes our life beautiful because now it's significant because we know there's an afterlife after that, but it also brings purpose to our life. And it gives me a reason to be fit and financially stable and to take care of my family and to guard myself and to prioritize, godly things over ungodly things and watch my discussion. And, faith is really, in every sense, the essence to the purpose of life.
Yeah, that was majestic.
Your favorite word of the day.
It's his favorite word every day.
It's my favorite word. So before we wrap up here, is there any do you have any other questions you want to ask Zach, Matt, or Zach? Is there anything that you want to share? Maybe that you plan on sharing that we didn't get to talk about.
I did like the comment about the identity. That's something I've never heard or thought about before, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that is a huge thing. And you think what we call identity politics and things like that. People put identities in different issues, and that's why you have these. And that's an important thing for us to remember when we're talking to someone. We're like, "Well, I just got this wrong, or I just said this wrong, or I just said that word." I'm not talking about you. You're not attacking that the opinion of the person. You're really attacking the identity of a person. That's a good reminder for all of us. But just a scripture that I really like that Paul gives. Talk about faith, I was well make it biblical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear it. I like it.
Yeah, so one thing that Paul talks about, and he uses this illustration, that it's all a metaphor or allegory of fitness. And he's talking to the Corinthians, and he says, do you not all know that if you run a race, every runner's running, but only one gets the prize, so run such a way to get the prize. And everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training, but they do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly, and I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. And you guys are familiar with the things Paul went through. He was stoned. He was beaten. He was possibly rejected by his family. We don't know. There's all kinds of theories out there whether or not he would have, if he's a part of the Sanhedrin, would have had a wife and kids, and who knows what happened to them if he wasn't part of the Sanhedrin. He wouldn't have had that. But he went through some awful things. Prison for several years, ended in beheading with the persecution of Nero. So he didn't have a glamorous life, but he treated his life like he was competing for something or in something, and
Right.
And he uses the illustration of Olympics, actually, is what that's talking about. That's when the Olympics would have started. And they would have started before them, but he's talking about the Olympic training there. And he says, our life's a lot like that. We're always getting beaten up. We're always feeling the pain of growth, because there is pain when, after college, I ran 3 miles and I puked 3 times, one for every mile. Like that was a thing that never happened before. And so there's pain that's associated with fitness, and he's like, I've gone through that. And when he talks to Timothy, who he calls his son in the faith, he says, I have fought the good fight. I finished the race, kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. Not only to me, but all those who have longed for his appearing. So he treated his life like it was a fitness contest, like he was competing in something. Right. And then he gets to the end where we can assume by necessity of context that he sees what's happening to the other prisoners, that they're getting beheaded, or he's told personally, hey, your day's coming up. And before he does that, he writes a letter to his son in the faith, and he says, hey, the race is over. I'm out of the gym. God's got something good for me, and you keep doing it too. I want to see you someday. And I just think those are words of encouragement we all need to hear. And maybe it's something, if you're, obviously we should all be into fitness, but if you're into the gym side of fitness, right. It's a scripture that you can pocket and realize that in a lot of ways, the training you're doing here at Lashley Training Center or wherever it might be, can be like a cross training for heaven someday, kind of like how Moses was a shepherd for 40 years before he led the Israelites. Right.
Yeah, that's a really cool analogy. I like that a lot. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Zach, for coming in today. That was super awesome. Yep. Do you have anything else you want to say, Matt, before we wrap it up?
No, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. It's really cool I already knew you, but it's good to meet you.
You too. And when we, maybe you'll come in another time. We got a lot of things we want to talk about in this area and others, so hopefully you'll come back in.
Yeah, if you have a topic that I'm ready for, go for it. If not, find a better person.
Talk about conviction and virtue and goodness, and there's all kinds of suffering. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of things I'd like to.
Well, that's really cool that you guys are able to use this to wrestle through some of the biggest questions in life. That's
right. Because I mean, it all, like we were talking about, basically, it all connects together. Like your fitness and everything goes along with your spirituality and all that stuff, I think. So yeah.
Well, this is an awesome show, guys. Keep it up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you. And if you believe it, you can achieve it. And we hope to see you in the gym soon, and have an amazing rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe on all the socials and all that good stuff.